Growth takes us through 4 distinct zones. The first zone we likely know well. It's our comfort zone. It's safe, it's familiar, it's all warm and toasty. But here's the key. Growth doesn't happen here. Think about your role. There will be things that you enjoy doing, things that you relish doing, and there'll be things that you don't relish, and the things that you don't enjoy, and maybe things that you're not very good at. The first bunch of things are likely right inside the middle of your comfort zone. They don't take much energy. In fact, they might even give you energy. You do them without too much effort. Why? Because they're firmly inside your comfort zone. Well, the other list, well, that's likely outside your comfort zone. The things that you don't like to do. Well, guess where growth happens? Does it happen inside your comfort zone or outside your comfort zone? Unfortunately, it's outside your comfort zone. There's no comfort in your growth zone and there's no growth in your comfort zone. Stay in your comfort zone for too long and you'll encounter stagnation and missed opportunities and lack of growth. And if there's lack of growth for you, then there's lack of growth for your people and lack of growth for the business. And then how will you likely future-proof yourself, your people, and your business? Leaders like you and me need the courage to push beyond our comfort zones into much more transformative zones. The 3 other zones that we'll talk about in today's episode. So I'm Antonio and today I'm going to be your leadership coach, your growth coach. And over the next 30 to 45 minutes, we're going to have a nice little session together and explore how we can break free from your comfort zone, take new challenges by the horns and step into the other zones that will help you grow and develop, and your people grow and develop, and your business grow and develop. And this way, you can finally begin to stop managing and start leading. So as a leader, there are certain things standing in our way. There are blind spots. The tricky thing about blind spots is we don't know what they are. If we did, then they wouldn't be blind spots. So we have some blind spots standing in our way. We have some biases standing in our way. We have some beliefs, some self-limiting beliefs standing in our way. We have fixed mindsets standing in our way, and we have comfort zones standing in our way. Let's figure out today how to not let comfort zones stand in our way. So we have some zones moving up and to the right. For those of you that are listening, please do, I'll talk to you about it in a minute, but please do download today's model because I'm struggling to decide how to describe it. It's kind of indescribable. You just have to see it to understand it. So listen, fine, but do download the model later. I'll tell you how to do that in a second. But before we dive into this, I want to tell you a story. Too many years ago that I care to remember, but let's say 30 years ago, perhaps. I was walking with my son, Alex, who was probably about 6 or 7 at the time. So there you go, it's probably about 27 years ago. We were on holiday and we were walking along a beach in Spain, on the border between Spain and Portugal. If anybody knows that part of the world, beautiful part of the world, a place called Costa de la Luz, Coast of the Light. It was beautiful light there. Anyway, we were walking along the beach, hand in hand, and everyone was having a good time. It was summer, and we came towards the end of the beach. We came to like some small, I want to say a rocky, outposty kind of cliff thing. A cliff overstates it. I think the thing that I'm thinking of that we're looking at, when it grew up, it was going to be a cliff, right? It was kind of like a baby cliff, and one day it aspired to be a cliff. Anyway, so we've got these rocks, maybe 20 feet high, perhaps. Alex was only 6 or 7, so to him, these rocks looked like St. Paul's Cathedral, I imagine. Anyway, there were some local lads. It was a Saturday or a Sunday, so lots of the locals were down at the beach. And there were some local young lads, maybe about Alex's age, not much older, and they were kind of horsing around on top of these rocks. And they were fooling around with each other, laughing and joking and picking on somebody and pushing them to the edge of the rocks. And then they were falling off the rock and diving into the water and then scrambling out and then running up and then pushing somebody else off the rocks. And they were having a whale of a time. Alex, who was a little timid little chap at the time, saw these boys throwing themselves off these rocks, which seemed to him like outrageous. And he stopped in his tracks and he said to me, "Gosh, look at those boys, Daddy." He said, "Aren't they brave?" And I took a second to look at them. And as I mentioned, they're laughing and joking and fighting and playing and throwing each other off the rocks. And they're having a whale of a time. And I said to Alex, I said, "Well, they don't look very brave to me, Alex. Like, they look like they're having a great time." Now, Alex was, as I said, the timid little chap, but a thoughtful little chap as well. And he thought about it and he said, "Do you know what, Daddy?" After a couple of minutes thinking about it, because this would be way outside of his comfort zone, right? He couldn't even imagine himself jumping off one of those rocks. Frankly, I couldn't imagine myself jumping off one of these rocks. But anyway, he thought about it for a minute and he said, "Do you know what, Daddy?" He said, "You probably only have to be brave the first time." And if you think about that for a second, then I think he was right? So whilst these boys were throwing themselves off the rocks, right, and having a great old time, I think they were still firmly inside their comfort zone. But the first time they jumped off these rocks, they was probably outside their comfort zone. So the more that they jumped off the rocks and the more familiar they became with jumping off the rocks, right, I think what they did was stretch their comfort zone. So initially way outside their comfort zone, and before too long, way inside their comfort zone. So their comfort zone stretched. Think about that story whilst we talk about today, and we're going through our model today. Think about, perhaps you only have to be brave a certain amount of the time. Perhaps you only have to be brave towards the beginning. Another quick story. I mentioned this story to one of my daughters, Alice, a couple of weeks ago. She picked me up from the airport. We had flown into the UK, into Manchester, and she picked me up from the airport. And even though she's, late 20s, early 30s, she's never driven me before outside the driving lessons that we used to have when she was first learning to drive all of those years ago, so when she was 17. So when Alice was 17, she's going to kill me for telling this story, but when Alice was 17, I took her to, get her used to driving before her driving lessons started. And we were talking when she picked me up from the airport a few weeks ago. I said, other than when you were learning to drive, I think this is the first time you have ever driven me. And we commented how competent a driver she was. She was a really, really good driver, right? Really, I felt really safe and all of that kind of stuff. And I said, "Do you remember when you were first learning to drive?" And we remembered back to the first lesson. In the UK, it's not, automatic. Everything's gear, right? Everything's gear shift. You can buy automatic cars, but you have to learn and take your test with a stick, I think the Americans call it. And her leg was shaking so violently that she could hardly push down the clutch, which is what you need to do before you put it into gear. And now she was driving around like a superstar. And I said, "Do you remember those first lessons, how nervous you were, how terrified you were, to the extent that your whole leg was shaking?" And again, what we're talking about there, like Alex and the boys throwing themselves into the water, into the sea in Portugal, or in Spain rather, was at the time when she was learning, it was outside her comfort zone, firmly outside her comfort zone. She stretched her comfort zone, she learned how to drive, and now it's fully inside her comfort zone, and she can practically drive, I don't want to say with her eyes shut, because she won't be doing that, but she can drive now as we all can. As we can all read and write and walk and talk and drive and use a fork and tie our shoelaces. All of these things at some point in our past were outside our comfort zone, and now we do them without thinking. So bear those three things in mind as we go through the model. Whilst we go through the model, I want you to remember if you're new to us today, that all models that we draw today and past and future episodes are going to be available as a complimentary digital download. So please do have a look at it. It won't be the image that I draw for you here today. Somebody very clever with a huge IQ, I just learned this morning, takes our images and professionalizes them and puts them on www.mydailyleadership.com/podcast. So what you see me draw will be tidied up, will be professionalized and perfected by Cornelia. Please do go along and download it, and it can act as a good aid memoir for you. All right, let's get into it. So here we start in our comfort zone. So our comfort zone is in our first area here, and our comfort zone is quite small, right? It's quite compact. And in our comfort zone, we feel safe and secure. I know that you're very familiar with fight and flight response, right? So freeze, fight, flight response. The amygdala hijack. Whilst ever we're in our comfort zone, we never encounter that fight, flight, freeze mindset, right? Because we're super inside our comfort zone and everything's warm and toasty and there's no threat, there's no danger. So we feel very safe and secure. Whenever we're trying to enact some kind of change into our organization as leaders and managers, whenever that change takes people outside their comfort zone, outside their safe and secure zone, that's when our amygdala hijack begins, and that's when we start to feel threatened, and we start to scan the horizon and look for ghosts in the machines that may not even be there, and we start to get scared, like Alex looking at the boys jumping off the cliff. So comfort zones are safe and secure and don't require any change or very, very minimal change. And as soon as change is required, as soon as we have to do things differently, as soon as we have to learn something new, we get outside of our comfort zone, and then things start to get a bit pear-shaped. We'll come to that in a second. So there are things that you as a leader, you find very comfortable to deal with. Some people are very comfortable with public speaking. Some other leaders find public speaking terrifying. That means that for you, public speaking is firmly inside your comfort zone, and then for somebody else, public speaking is outside their comfort zone. So if you think about all the things that leaders have to deal with, right? Public speaking perhaps is one of those things. Holding people accountable might be another. Reading spreadsheets might be another. Handling and dealing with change might be another. Having difficult conversations might be another. You get the idea, right? Stop micromanaging, right? So it could be starting things as well as stopping things. Sometimes stopping things takes us outside our comfort zones. Well, if you wrote a table of things that are inside your comfort zone as a leader, you'll do those things easily. They take no energy. In fact, as I said earlier, you probably get energy from some of those things. But then the things that are outside your comfort zone, well, you know what? Those are the things that's probably holding you back. So if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got. So everything that we've always done is inside our comfort zone. If we want to do things, if we want different outputs, different results, for example, then we're going to have different inputs or higher quality of input or a different kind of input. So if we want the output to change, we have to change the input. And if we change the input and that input takes us outside of our comfort zone, it's going to be difficult. So what do we do? Well, how do we feel when we get outside of our comfort zone? Well, of course, we feel fear, right? And fear, my old coach used to say to me that that's just false expectations appearing real, right? I don't know whether I agree with that entirely, but you get the idea. In our fear zone, what do we tend to do? What do we tend to do when we get to our fear zone? Well, we tend to make excuses. We tend to defend, justify, and rationalize. We tend to put things off. We tend to procrastinate and all of those kind of stuff. So in our fear zone, we look for excuses and we find excuses. Can't do it right now until I've alphabetized my CDs. How old am I? I can't do it until I've organized my sock drawer. I can't do it until we've just done this. I can't do it. Right? We look for excuses. If you find yourself looking for excuses to not do the things that you should be doing as a leader, it's because it's outside your comfort zone, and we have to figure out how to be brave. If any of you have read Brené Brown's book about bravery, you know, leadership is all about bravery. You cannot be a leader if you cannot figure out how to get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? One of the things that we have to do as a leader is first admit we don't know anything. For some leaders, for some of our clients, and maybe if they're watching, you know who you are, the thing that causes them most fear is admitting that they don't know something, right? So, fear zone, we find excuses. When you recognize yourself doing that, all I'll tell you is this: keep going, right? Keep going. Churchill says, if you're going through hell, just keep going, right? So, comfort zone, then we have our fear zone. If we keep going and not look for excuses and recognize that we're going to make some mistakes, and that's okay. There are good wrongs and there are bad wrongs. A good wrong is when we make a mistake and learn from it. A bad wrong is when we make a mistake and don't learn from it. So there are right wrongs and there are wrong wrongs, right? What we go through as we push through our fear zone and keep going nonetheless, like Alice learning how to drive, for example, we then get to our learning zone. In other words, if we're going to learn something new, we first have to go through the fear zone. And that's okay. And you've done it many, many, many times. I mentioned earlier, you can probably read and write and walk and talk and use a fork, right? All of those things that at one time in the past were very difficult for you. But you learned how to do them with the right coaching, with the right support, with the right kind of persistence. Sometimes we ask our clients, what does success look like? And people say achieving goals and all of that stuff. And I say, yeah, okay, I'll give you all of that. I think success is reaching our full potential, wherever that may be. And how do we reach our full potential? Well, I think the way that we talk about it at MDL is, in my daily leadership, is success equals failure plus persistence. Success equals failure plus persistence. If you keep going, you can't fail. You won't fail. How do I know? Because you'll read and write and walk and talk and drive a car and use a fork. Okay, so what do we do in our learning zone? Well, here's where we acquire new skills. And experiences, okay? Good. So it's a shame that we can't go straight from comfort zone to learning zone. We have to go through the fear zone. For some of us, for some instances, that fear zone is just going to be nice and shallow like this. And for some other people, it's going to be way outside like that. The point is, if we're going to learn something new, we have to get through that zone. Can't shortcut it. We just have to keep going. Okay, so learning zone. What happens after our learning zone? So we were in our comfort zone. We faced our fear. We battled on. We kept going. We then got into the learning zone. We made some mistakes, but we learned from those mistakes. They're the right kinds of wrong, right? We improved, we got better. I used to have a boss that says, hey, Antonio, what did you learn last week? His view was that every day is a learning opportunity. Every day is an opportunity to learn something new, to learn and expand and grow. If ever I said to him that I hadn't learned anything, he would say, that's such a mistake, because that means that we haven't failed anywhere, we haven't learned anything, we haven't made the place better. He said, and it's a bit grisly, and these are his words, not mine, he says, the only advantage we have today over yesterday is what we have learned, because otherwise we're just a day closer to dead. Okay, well, grisly, but it's true, right? So think to yourself, what do I need to learn? How do I learn it? How do I go from my comfort zone through my fear zone and into my learning zone? Now, think about how you learn to ride a bike. I imagine you can, or swim, right? What's the best way to learn how to not fall off a bike? To fall off a bike. When you fall off a bike, you pretty quickly learn how to not fall off a bike. And that's, I think, the only way that you learn how to not fall off a bike is by falling off a bike. And I remember when I was teaching my kids to ride a bike, that I would hold the seat behind them, right? And I would trot along behind them. And at some point, I knew that when I let go of the seat and they carried on going, when they realized that I had let go of the seat, what were they likely to do? Because they felt all safe and secure because I was holding the seat. As soon as I let go of the seat and they realized I'd let go of the seat, they quickly went from their comfort zone into their fear zone, and until they overcame that fear, they fell off the bike. And falling off the bike and realizing that no ambulance was needed, we could just dust ourselves off, get back on the bike or the cliff in Portugal and try again and have another go. As soon as we realize that, then we learn to ride the bike. So there's some fear. Now, as a parent, we know they're going to fall off the bike. So what do? Well, we try and make that fall as safe as possible. We give them crash helmets and elbow pads and knee pads, right? And all of those good things. We try and make it a safe failure, and that's okay, because that's how we learn. You know, in my day, there were no elbow pads and knee pads, and I don't want to be that person that says, yeah, things were better in my day. I get it. But so we've got something to learn. Let's make it safe. Let's make it as organized as possible, but we still have to fall off the bike. And so long as we learn how to not fall off the bike, good, then we learn something new. Okay, cool. Let's just take a minute before we jump into the last area of our model. And let's just do a tiny bit of housekeeping. So for those of you who are new to the podcast, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm glad you're here. I'm Antonio Garrido, and I'm the founder and president of My Daily Leadership. I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I'm a business leader and the proud author of 3 books. Actually, we have a contract for our 4th, which we're currently writing. Alice and I. Now, over the years, I've worked with everyone from scrappy startups, lots of those guys, all the way up to Fortune 60 giants, helping them build stronger leaders and achieve substantial, sustainable growth. When we launched this podcast too many moons ago, we just had one simple goal. All we wanted to do was to give busy leaders like you some real value, real ROI for your time, effort, and energy, and for joining us, right? Now, we know that you're juggling a million things all the time. So we do try and keep each episode packed with some practical insights and stories and actionable models and stuff that you can take away and use to tackle whatever leadership challenges you're facing right now. So if you've gotten something useful so far out of today's episode, and hoping you have, then please do just take a second to like and subscribe on YouTube, or follow us on whatever your preferred go-to podcast platform is. Here's the thing, your support genuinely helps us reach more growth-oriented leaders just like you, and it helps them find us. So if you're on YouTube, I want to hear from you as well. Tell us your biggest leadership challenges in the comments. And I promise we'll either point you to an episode that tackles just that issue, or we'll create a brand new one for you. We really will. So we seriously do read every comment, and we always reply, and we always act on them. So just before we jump back into comfort zones, remember all of the models, as I mentioned earlier, that we discuss in this episode, all past episodes, they're all available for free, right? So download them from our website. Cornelia, our phenomenal podcast producer, takes my dreadful scribbles and transforms them into sleek professional models that you can download and pass around to your colleagues. So just head over to www.mydailyleadership.com/podcast. All right, let's get back to finishing off this model. All right, so we said we start in our comfort zone. We have to plow on through our fear zone. If we manage that well. That doesn't have to take forever. That can be quite quick, right? Like Alex says, sometimes you only have to be brave the first time. Then we start edging into our learning zone, where we're acquiring new skills and new experiences, new beliefs, okay? What happens after our learning zone? Well, it's after our learning zone when we then start to apply all of the things that we've learned that we get where we're all trying to go, which is into our growth zone. And in our growth zone is where we find new purpose. And we don't find new purpose until we get there. You'll know that at MDL we often talk to our leaders and we say, hey, well, we want you to try and do this week, because not all of our models, a large portion of our models work on this principle up and to the right. So if you could imagine that if this was sort of on some kind of graph paper, you can see what we're looking to do here is very much up and to the right. And so this model also serves that, this moving up and to the right. Remember then, just before we wrap, there is no growth in your comfort zone, and there is no comfort in your growth zone. So the Navy SEALs, I think their motto is get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that's the message for today in terms of leadership. If you're in a leadership position, you have a responsibility to get comfortable being uncomfortable. You owe that responsibility to yourself, to your people, and to your organization. Because what got you here won't get you there. What does that mean? That means we've got to learn new skills and abilities, new mindsets, new beliefs. And we don't do that inside our comfort zone. If you want to stay warm and toasty and inside your comfort zone forever, then leadership probably isn't for you. Okay, well, on that rather grim note, I think that's where we'll leave it for today. So before we say goodbye, genuinely would love to hear your thoughts. So after watching this episode, would you say that you're spending most of your time at the moment in your comfort zone? Let's call that A, your comfort zone. The fear zone, let's call that B. The learning zone, we'll call that C, or the growth zone, we'll call that D. So where are you living right now? I'm hoping it's not in A. So we'll eliminate A. We'll just say, where are you living now? The fear zone, learning zone, or the growth zone. Just leave A, B, C, or D in the comments. That would be great. And if there are lots of A's, let's hope we can change some of those A's to D's over the coming months, because that's where we get better. One way to do that is to like and follow and subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss out on more comfort zone busting episodes like this one. If you need more detail on any of that, please do reach out to us and we'll help you. A huge thank you, genuine thank you for tuning into another episode today. As always, I do hope this episode offered you something of value, even if it's just getting your mindset right. This is very much a mindset episode today. Even if it's just one tool, one tip that improves your leadership ability by only 1%. Remember, there's enormous power in marginal gains. Just 1% over time compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world, according to Einstein. And who's going to argue with him? In the next episode, we're going back to our leadership honeycomb model. I think that's the last one. It breaks down the 6 key areas where businesses often fall short. And in our next episode, we're talking specifically about what lack of alignment in your organization means for your people and your business. Spoiler alert, it's not going to be pretty and it's not going to be good. So if you have a lack of alignment in your team, sometimes we refer it to as lack of linkage, the thing that links everybody together. Because what links everybody together? Alignment. Who's responsible for that? You are. I'm Antonio Garrido with My Daily Leadership. Thanks for being here. Until next time, by wisdom and effort, and try and be a bit more uncomfortable. See you soon.